Today we're doing a service on a Rodeo 2004 model, and it's got the 3.5 litre V6, and the owner reckons that occasionally, intermittently, it's having trouble going into top gear. Sort of jumps in and out sometimes. Could be a contaminated solenoid. It doesn't look like it's ever been serviced. Suck the oil out of it. These have got the A340 Series transmissions in them, the 4-speed. If you don't have a vacuum pump, you can suck the oil out of it, or drain the oil out of that plug there. And also, before you take the pan off, make sure up here where the filler tube is, there's a little join there where my finger is. Just make sure that's nice and clean too. That's where that's going to separate. And this filler tube comes off with the pan. It's stuck on there. I've left 2 bolts on there. Left a bolt over here and one over here. Just carefully pry that off. When you're prying it off, it's important to not damage the pan rail. Otherwise you won't be able to reuse it. This pan doesn't look like it's ever been off. There we go. See, this one's got the snorkel on it, and we can also see the solenoids. Four bolts on it. See, this particular filter, it's got 3 pickup holes, so make sure you get the right one. And what we might do on this one is just whiz those solenoids out and just give them a test and a flush. And you can see the 4 magnets in the pan. They're quite covered in the fuzz there, so they wouldn't have been working anymore. Once they become covered, they can't attract metal anymore. So the next place that stuff circulates to or gets stuck to are the solenoids. So here I've got the 2008 June Gears magazine, and it just shows you the valve body. You can see the 3 shift solenoids, and they're just on-off solenoids. So we can flush them quite easily and test them for leaking. This one here, and you can see when you pull them apart, you can get a kit to pull them apart, clean them up. And here we are on the shop manual, and you can see how they number the solenoids from back to front, from the rear of the transmission to the front. So number 1 is the rear one, number 2, 3, 4, and number 4 is the front one. And here we have the operation of the shift solenoids. So you can see over here on the left, going through all your gears first. Number 1's on, number 2's off, and so on. So it's important that these solenoids don't leak. They can, a little bit of tolerance, if they're leaking a tiny bit, you can get away with it, but ideally they shouldn't be leaking. And according to the shop manual, you can see they should have a resistance of between 10 and 16 ohms. To pressure test them, you test them to 71 psi, so 70 psi, and they shouldn't be leaking. The torque converter solenoid, same sort of deal, 10 to 16 ohms, and also test it to 71 psi. The linear one's a little bit different because that's a metering solenoid. You have to alternate the amperage, and you need to get a nice steady flow there. But flushing them out will definitely be beneficial, especially with all that fine metal floating around in there, and given that it's never been serviced. They start from the rear, number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4. That one, to get to that one, you need to remove the valve body. So we're just going to do these 4. These ones are just on-off solenoids. 1 and 2 are your shift solenoids. You got, yeah, I think that one's a torque converter clutch solenoid. So you might have some sort of improvement there. Take the clips off. You just press it. Press the little plastic bit there, and just slide it out. And if you like, you can actually do one at a time. These two, the brackets, you can't really mix them up because these brackets are a little bit different on each one. But if you choose to do them one at a time, it'll be easier for you. So I'll just whiz all them out first. 10mm. Smaller ones here are 8mm. So I've got that one off first. Number 4. And just wriggle it out. It should just come out. There we go. And we're going to test that one. And you can see our wash tray's nice and clean. It's all been cleaned out. And now I'll just start with the torque converter clutch solenoid. That one. We'll just give it a bit of a wash. You can see there's already, given that's on the outside, they're little magnets on the bottom of our tray over here, and you can see all that real fine stuff already accumulating on there. What actually happens when that fine material is attracted to the coil, it reduces the magnetic field of the coil, so then it can't work as properly as it can. They actually, the varying of the magnetic field is actually called induction, I think. Now I've got our little demagnetizer, and I'm just going to demagnetize the solenoid. I'm just holding the button down with my finger there. Now we'll just give it another clean. You can see how much, I don't know if you can see that, but it's collected. Oh, I've got a bristle off the brush. A whole lot more rubbish out of it. So definitely a good idea to demagnetize these things. And I've just got bottle with clean solvent. In our parts washer, that X55 solvent just circulates through. Let's give it a blow out. Cleaned it out. Let's give it another flush, because that muck in there actually gets stuck to it. Sometimes when it's wet, it washes off a bit better. And when I see that there's no more muck coming out of these little nooks and crannies, I know it's probably as clean as I'm going to get it without pulling it apart. So now we'll just give it a test and make sure it's not leaking and that the resistances are within specs. You can see this one's also got one terminal, so you'll put your earth on the housing and your live or your active or positive on that terminal, and you can test them with 12 volts. I like to test them at 10.5 volts or 4 volts, because a car battery is considered flat when it gets down to 10.4 volts. So if it's not leaking when the battery is at the minimum power, you know that it's going to actually have more strength in there to hold that valve to close it off. Much better at 12 volts or 14.3 volts is actually what a car should run at. You can see even without air, you can hear it clicking. So we know it's working, and that's at 10.4 volts. Now I've got our little air pressure tester, and that just basically is made to slide over that O-ring there, like so. And we put it into our, you've got to hold it with your thumb pretty hard. You can see when I put the air through it, I just won't do it for a moment, you won't hear what I'm saying, but it's normally open, and then when we put power to it, it'll close it off. And when it's closed off, that's when it should not be leaking. So I'll just do that now. And you can hear that is working pretty well. It's not leaking at all. And just on another note, if there was more muck coming out of it, sometimes when you put the air through it like that, or directed air through where it should be going, you'll get more muck showing up that it's been coming out of it. So if you're going to flush it, demagnetize it again, because once you put power to it, it'll magnetize that fine metal stuff, and then you can't blow it out. It just keeps rolling around in there. You've probably noticed that if you're trying to clean a magnet. The stuff's pretty hard to get off sometimes, especially on the neodymium magnets. But if you're going to do that, demagnetize it, flush it again, and then you can test it again. And what I should have done before we even started this is check the resistance in there. But we know it was working. It was just basically contaminated. Put that there. I'm on the 200 scale. You can see that's on about 12.9 12.8, 12.9 ohms. As these warm up, the resistance will increase as well. So it's always a good idea, if you want to properly test it, you've got to warm these up. We've got like a little oven there that we can set the temperature to about 60 degrees, warm it up, and we also like to heat them up to about 90 degrees or 100 degrees. If you do it with a heat gun, you can actually damage that plastic on the coil because you can't get a good even heat. Ideally, if you've got like something like an oven or but one that you can sort of set the temperature accurately, that's the best way to do it. That one's good. Right to go back in the car. One back in. One thing I forgot to mention is to check the O-ring in it. Make sure the O-ring's good as well. It's sort of a bit useless if everything's operating properly, it's not leaking, but it's leaking at the O-ring. And another thing I like to do because these brackets are just on one side, when they get pressure on them, it'll actually twist that solenoid. So just make sure you're pushing it in as hard as you can when you do this up. So, or even as you're doing it up, sort of keep pushing it, and that way it'll sort of keep pushing it in. That way the twisting effect, you can't show it, won't be as great. We're just going to whiz this one off now. Note of how that bracket goes when you take it out. And that one just slides out as well, like so. And you can see the little slot, you don't see there. Okay, I've got that accumulator out, and you can just see how it's all laid out. You got the end cap, circlip, big spring, little spring, and a little piston or sleeve. I'll just give all that a good wash out. And the way to test if that one's leaking too much is just to fill it with solvent. And you'll see if the solvent's running away, you'll know it's a little bit worn. Okay, I've washed it all, blown it all out nicely. And we'll just plonk that little piston in there. See? And it's moving nice and freely. You can hear that. And now I just get the clean solvent and just fill it up. You can see it's actually holding that solvent really well, not leaking at all. And don't forget that liquid is also a lot thicker than air when you're testing these things. That's why I mentioned earlier with the solenoid testing, if they leak a tiny little bit with air, it means, generally speaking, they won't leak when the oil's in there. So you can see that one, while I was talking to you, it was holding that liquid, that solvent, which is a lot thinner than oil as well. Not a problem. So that's good. We'll just whack those springs back in. The little plate. Sometimes you can flip the plate over if it's worn. If it's worn a mark in it, you can sometimes flip them over 180 degrees. Just get better wear on it, or new wear. That one doesn't look like it's a problem. And also these circlips, you'll find sometimes what I like to do is just countersink the bottom side. And our little circlip pointy nose pliers, when they fit in there like that, if it's a bigger circlip, I like to countersink them. It'll just lock in a little bit easier, so you can fit them in better. But these are all right. That's not going to fly out anywhere. I'm just going to push that in with my thumb. just make sure that it's actually located in that groove. Otherwise, if it's just sitting on the top there, it will fly out when it starts working. And what you can do is just see if you can rotate that circlip. See if I can rotate it around. It's actually caught in that groove. If you can't spin it around, or if it comes out to the side, you'll know that it hasn't gone in properly. And there we go. Without taking the valve body off, that's basically all we can do, those 3 solenoids and this accumulator. And while I've got that out, you can see where the other solenoid is. That's a linear solenoid. You actually have to lower the valve body to be able to slide that out. So we're not going to go to that extent, but we'll clean up, like I mentioned earlier. We've done this one, and I'll do these 2 and put it back together. When you're taking them off, don't forget to put your clip back on as well. I'm just going to leave that one off until I get that accumulator back in. Taking these off, just take a note of the bolts as well. The rear one is the longest one, and then you've got the slightly shorter one. If you mix them up, sometimes you can do damage when you tighten it up inside, so just make a note of that. Quickly, these rear 2, I've flushed them out. You can see the fair bit more come out of these 2, but there are 2 of them. And these, I've hooked up the power. They're normally closed with the air. That's got air going through it now. And that power off, power on. So these are normally closed, the rear 2. The front one is normally open, so it works opposite. The reason why I explain that is because Rostra have aftermarket solenoids, and they're basically the same solenoid but with little different bracket attachments. If you mix it up, if you put one of the ones that goes on normally open where it's normally closed, you'll get all sorts of funny things happening with your shifts in your transmission. So you've got to make sure that you put the right one on in the right spot. This one here, I'll just quickly do it as well, just show you. Already tested it. And none of them are leaking, but they were contaminated. That's got air going through it now. No power. Power. Off. On. Off. On. And they're not leaking at all. And just for reference, I've got the linear solenoid details there. That's the one that's on top of the valve body. You've got to remove it to get to it. And the resistance there should be between 5.1 and 5.5 ohms. And if you read through all that, you'll notice that they call it, you need to test it with a variable power supply. And I've cleaned all the muck out of the pan and on the magnets. And you can see I've put them up here above those little ribs there as well. So the idea is to get the magnet to be able to work top and bottom. If you put them just flush like that, they're only going to work over the top. Put them like this, you get much more surface area working for the magnet. And I don't really believe it matters where you put it, but just make sure you put it out of the way of any solenoids or any shafts that are moving there. Cleaned all that elastic off as well, you've probably noticed. These pan gaskets only go on one way, so make sure the holes are all lined up before you put it on. And we've flushed and tested these, they're not leaking, so I'd say they were just contaminated. I would like to clean that one up there, but bigger job to get the valve body out. But the driver might find, the owner might find that there is a improvement here in the operation of the transmission. Got a new filter on, like I mentioned earlier. Make sure it's one with the 3 pickups, like there, 1, 2, 3, and that the snorkel height's the same. On these I think it's all the same. We can put the pan back on. Up here there's an O-ring on that top half of the filler tube. Make sure that's nice and pliable and a little bit raised from the groove. And that's basically it. Make sure you clean all the Celastic off your pan rail if it's got any on there. I don't like using Celastic. It just shows me that the transmission's never been serviced. When you're putting the pan on, it's a good idea to put all the bolts on loose. It'll save you either cross-threading the bolts. They are a very short bolt too, so don't over-tighten them. And also it'll stop you from misaligning the gasket as well. So a good idea to do it that way, and then just tighten it all up. Now this is a 2-wheel drive one, so there's no transfer case to check. But while you're under the vehicle, it's a good idea to check all these universal joints, the centre bearing, rear unis, if you want to check the diff oil. Pop the plug out there. And that's basically it. We'll slow it down, put some oil in it. And I'm on the Tritech Lubricants website. And you can see we can either use the heavy duty full synthetic fluid, or you can use the Dextron 3 fluid in these transmissions. Now filling these, it's a royal pain in the bum. The oil will develop an airlock in there, in the filler tube, yeah, so, right next to the engine oil filler. So what we like to do is push a hose right down as far as we can go. You just push that right down, even if you're filling it with a funnel. Good idea to just poke a hose right down there, and that'll help eliminate that airlock problem. It'll fill the oil right down the bottom. And I've pumped in about 3 litres, and then I can start the vehicle, go through the gears and just check the oil level. Important to not overfill these, so make sure you check them at operating temperature and make sure it hasn't gone over. If it does go over, you just have to drain a little bit out from the bottom, or if you've got a vacuum pump, you can just suck a little bit out. Makes it a bit easier. Just go through all the gears. Okay, I've got enough oil in it. I'm just going to take for a run. And you check the oil level at operating temperature with the motor running. Just go through your gears, put it back into park or neutral, pull the handbrake on, and just make sure it's close to the top mark there. Anyway, thank you for watching.